So financial risk versus reward, which funding option is right for us? That's today's agenda, and hopefully we'll be able to provide some insight throughout the course of this presentation. I'm going to invite everyone to go ahead and submit questions during. Don't worry about interrupting. I'm happy to stop and address those questions. There will be time at the end for Q&A as well, and I'll do my best to keep an eye on the chat box. So one of the most common questions, and by the way, I just hit my 30th year in the business. So I was similar to Doogie Howser in that I started when I was 12, but he went the path of becoming a doctor, and I chose insurance. So I am in my 30th year, and one of the most common questions I receive from existing clients as well as prospective companies that I talk to is, should we consider self-funding? And to be frank, the answer that I give is always yes. We should always consider or be open to alternate ways to fund health insurance, which includes self-funding. That question is usually a conversation starter, and it usually leads to me asking them additional questions. Generally, why are you asking this question? And the answers fall into these primary categories.
Is there something else I can help with?
So the answer is, you have experience with self-funding, you want to learn more about it, you heard or read that it will save you money, you need or want more flexibility in your plan, and you want more access to data and information. These are all valid responses on why you might consider alternative funding or self-funding. And by the way, what I find is most people use the term self-funding when they're referring to any type of funding. And we're going to talk through like some of those differences throughout the course of this presentation. Really, the next step for me is to gauge how much the client understands, which eventually leads to the most important or salient question. The risk versus reward continuum. Because the reality is, we would all go self-funding if we knew it saved us money and there was no risk. That would be easy. That would be an easy decision. The way we look at funding is, the greater the risk, the greater the reward. The greater the opportunity to save money, get access to reams of claim data, is also the option that's going to provide the highest risk in those options. Think of it like this, right? Maverick can't save the world if he's not willing to fly upside down into a volcano backwards. And I'm sorry if I gave away the plot to this fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, I do highly encourage it. But the point is that without that risk, there is no reward on the other side. So really what I start with is trying to understand, what the client knows or understands about self-funding. And the definition we most commonly use in the industry, very simply, is it's just an alternative way to pay for your insurance. And it's a way, really, when you think about it, it is less complex than people realize because there are just moving parts. What we're doing in a self-funding environment is breaking down the components of a fully insured plan and changing the way that we fund those. In this case, if we look at just straight self-funding, you can think of dropping your health insurance costs, pieces of it, into buckets. Okay, there's fixed costs, which is administration and stop loss. Those are generally charged on a per employee basis. We're going to get more into that. The variable cost is your claim cost, right? It's what claims your members incur in a given day, week, month, and over the course of the year. So, how can self-funding save my company money? Because again, by the time we've hit this point in the conversation, they've read that it can save money. They've been told by others that it can save money. And by the way, the one thing I'll say when it comes to benefits is each benefit program is its own animal. If you are out there and you have multiple kids, or you've been around different kids, you've coached them, or you've seen siblings, right? They could be born from the same person. They could have the same upbringing, environment, and they can be two totally different human beings. Well, that's the same thing when it comes to health insurance plans. You can have the same type of company. We both have 120 employees, and I'm a law firm and they're an architectural firm, so our costs should be the same. But it's nothing like that at all. Each company's experience is individual in and to itself. So therefore, just because your friend who's in HR or in finance saved a bunch of money with self-funding or a captive or something like that does not in turn mean that you're going to have the same experience. And likewise, you may save a lot of money and they may not save anything. So how does a company save money with self-funding? Well, there are a couple of ways. First of all, the fixed costs are quantifiable and predictable. Remember, we talked about the fixed cost being your administration charges. That's what you pay the plan to administer your claims, to process claims, maybe to provide utilization review, all the fun stuff like pre-certification. They're there to provide customer service. That's the administration piece. And then there's the stop loss piece. And that's also a fixed cost. That's usually a per employee or per member charge each month. And it's set for the year, just like fully insured premiums. So generally, the fixed costs in a self-funded plan are cheaper than the fixed costs in a fully insured plan. That's one way that you save money. There's something else called premium taxes. Depending on the state you live in, the state wants to get their piece of the action, so they charge the insurance carrier premium taxes. They charge a % of the premium that you pay them. The state in turn collects that to fund their Department of Banking and Insurance, and I'm sure a myriad of other things unrelated to insurance. But that premium tax can be anywhere from 0.5% to I've read and heard as much as 3.5%. So think about that. As much as 3.5% of your fully insured premium is not even going to the insurance carrier. It's actually going to the state in which your employer resides. So you reduce those greatly. You only pay premium taxes on the insurance piece of your product, which would be the stop loss insurance. There's, of course, margin, right? Margin is the cost of the risk and the projected profit retained by the insurance company. The insurance company is going on risk. They're going to charge you $1 million, hoping that's what it's going to cost or less. But if it goes over that, then they're going to lose money. So they build margin into every fully insured plan, which if you fall well below the margin, that just adds to the profit level. The variable costs fluctuate, and that's based on claims. So claims change on a regular basis. And that's the most important part of your overall program, because depending on the size of your group, claims are anywhere from 75 to 90% of your actual plan costs. I'm going to show you a few examples of a self-funded program. So here, if the plan runs as expected, expected means that your insurance company, underwriter, or we, or your broker, underwrites and assesses your risk and says, this is where we think the plan is going to run in the coming year. And then you set what's called premium equivalent rates. That's your rates: single rate, parent, child, husband, wife, 2-party, 3-party, family, whatever it is. That's how you set your rates. And then you set your employee contributions. So in this scenario, let's say the plan, the fully insured premium is $1 million. The self-insured expected cost is $980,000. Why is it a little lower? Remember, we said the administrative expense is lower, right? No premium tax. You reduce some of the risk and margin. So in the fully insured plan, your administrative or fixed costs are $150,000. In the self-funded plan, they might be $130,000. Your expected claims in both plans is $850,000. Because remember, just because we change the funding does not lower our claim projection. It's just different in terms of how we pay for those claims. So in this case, the actual claims came in right at expected. Claims came in at $850,000 under both scenarios. The company pays $1 million under the fully insured, and under the self-insured, you pay $980,000. You saved money in fixed costs. Now we're going to move to the next scenario where your claims come under expected. So again, everything remains the same in the first 3 lines, but in the actual claims line, your claims came in at $800,000, $50,000 under what was expected. In the fully insured, you still pay that $1 million. But in the self-insured, you only pay the amount of claims that came in. $800 plus the $130 administrative expense gives you a total of $930,000. You saved $70,000 or 7%. Now, let's go to the flip side. What happens if the plan runs worse? Again, first 3 lines, everything remains the same. We're still expecting $850,000, only the claims came in at $900,000. Well, in the fully insured environment, that's too bad for the insurance company. They had to absorb that overage. In the self-insured environment, you're paying those claims up to a maximum level. In this case, you would fall under the maximum level. So your plan actually costs $30,000 more this year. So it costs you more to be self-funded. That's the risk versus reward continuum. So this really brings us to a question that I often get. Okay, John, I understand the risk versus reward. How do I know that we're a candidate for self-funding? I like the idea of eliminating premium tax or reducing it. I like the idea of my company keeping the margin and the profit. And I like the idea that I think my employees are pretty healthy and we don't incur a lot of claims. So I think we can save money. So how do we determine we're a candidate? And this is where it's really important to have the proper advisor, partner, broker, consultant, whatever term you want to use. Perform the proper analysis up front. We do that by looking at historical plan performance. We also project the future of what a self-funded plan may look like using your available data, claim information. We use fixed costs that we know are in line with benchmarks in the industry. And in the case of our organization and some of our competitors, but not most, we have really strong data analytics software that predicts the feasibility of self-funding. So here's an example of a look-back analysis. And you want to use more than 1 year. 1 year is not a statistically valid time frame. You could have had 3 large claimants, or you could have had none in a year where you normally have 3. So you want to use multiple years whenever possible. I apologize, this chart got a little funky on me. This first one we're going to do is time period. That's showing you year 1 and year 2, and then a combined. We always want to look at what was the effect of the combined time frame. The estimated claims, that's supposed to be million. So it's $1,743,732. I'm sure you can follow along. In this case, what we're looking at is in year 1, you had $1.7 million in claims. You had $645,000 in fixed costs. That's stop loss and administration. So the total self-funded cost was $2.388 million. And your fully insured premium was $2.97 million. Would have saved $586,000 that year by being self-funded. By the way, this is a real client. This is a true case study. So you're like, wow, awesome. No brainer. 600 grand saved the company. I look like a conquering hero. This is how erratic claims can be on a 200 employee group. The following year, claims jumped all the way to 2.38 million. Fixed costs went up a little bit because stop loss premiums increase every year. Your estimated self-funded costs were 3.1 million. That year, you paid about 3.07 in fully insured premium. Would have actually spent $47,000 more to be self-funded that year. So again, we don't want to look, if we had only done this past year's look back, well, you'd go, okay, well, we're not a candidate for self-funding. This is why we want to use multiple years, 2 years at a minimum, 3 years is even better. I wouldn't go beyond 3 years. At that point, you have the opposite happens, which is you have turnover, you have pricing changes in the marketplace, utilization, and claims become less valid after more than 3 years, historical. So in this case, when we combine the 2 years, we're still looking at that bottom right-hand red, $500,000 savings by being self-funded for this particular client. On the next slide, I'm going to show you that there's more that goes into it than what you just saw right there. Here we had the medical claims, we had the pharmacy claims, we totaled the claims, we had stop loss recoveries, which I'm going to talk about. Here there was a large claimant that happened in 2020. There was roughly $380,000, but we have $125,000 stop loss, so we got back $255,000 if we had been self-funded. That's how we got to the net claim number. Here we have stop loss premiums. We have administrative expenses of $50 and ACA taxes. Yes, you still have to pay ACA taxes even on a self-funded plan. And by the way, depending on the administrator, you may be responsible for kind of calculating and paying those separately. But that's something we would work out with you at the time of transition. That's how we get to this savings of $586,000 in year one. So you can see there's more to it than just that chart we had shown you. And then we're going back to the most recent years, same model, same scenario. You can see here in the red, the 34,000. We didn't have one big, large claimant. We had a bunch of little claims that totaled this big claim total of 2.38 million. And that's why we didn't save any money this year on self-funding. So this is an eye chart. It's a test to see how good your progressive lenses work, your transition lenses. Now, what it really is this, I had talked to you previously about data analytics software. So this is an actuarial modeling tool. We do not expect you to read it or understand it. Our underwriters and your account managers and consultants do understand it. What this tool does is it takes your claim data, in this case, 2 years of data. It takes your census information, a few other demographic inputs, nature of industry, geography, and your plan design. And it models 10,000 potential claim scenarios. And then it gives you the likelihood. See this red about the middle of the page on the far right, base case and scenario. What this is saying is that your plan, in the case of this particular client, is 70% likely, 70 to 76% likely to beat fully insured. So we saw in 2 years, it was $500,000 savings. Well, this actuarial modeling tool is separate from that. It doesn't take any of our underwriters' input on what we assess the risk to be. It's using its own actuarial table and factors. So I would say this client is a good client for self-funding. I think they're a good candidate for self-funding. So with that, I see no questions so far. So I'm going to keep plowing ahead, but now I'm going to get into a little more of the nuts and bolts of self-funding. How do I protect myself? You saw that one part where we had a $380,000 claim, but we pulled $255,000 out of the claims. Why is that? Because we assume that the client would have stop loss at a level that we would recommend. In the case of this client, 200 employees on plan, first year in self-funding, we were going to recommend $125,000 individual stop loss level. That's something called, you'll hear ISL, you'll hear it referred to as specific level or pooling level. These all refer to individual stop loss deductible. And what that is it's insurance protection against a single large individual claimant. An example would be a premature baby, a high cancer claim, a renal dialysis patient, something like that. One person incurring tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in claims. So you pay for insurance and think of it like a big deductible. So individual stop loss is a deductible that is applied to every member on the plan, not employee and their family, but each individual person on the plan. So it would be the employee and their domestic partner, spouse, whatever it is that are legally on the plan. They would each have to meet, or you would have to meet this deductible before the insurance kicks in. So think of a high deductible for your company to absorb that cost before getting reimbursed oftentimes from the carrier. So sometimes, depending on the arrangement, you might front the full $380,000 and wait for reimbursement. There are some things called immediate reimbursement. It's all in the contract. If and when you ever go this route, we would show you all of the variables and how to protect yourself in the most efficient and effective manner. The next level of stop loss insurance is called aggregate protection. Aggregate protection is a deductible for the entire plan. So let's say your plan is expected to have $1 million of claims in the coming year. Well, aggregate protection would kick in once you went so many dollars above the million. So usually that's a 10 to 25% claim corridor. So that means you'd have to have $1,100,000 at a 10% claim corridor before aggregate stop loss would kick in. And at a 25% claim corridor, you would have to have $1,250,000 in claims before aggregate protection kicks in. Individual stop loss hits and reimbursements happen all of the time. Depending on the size of the group, I have clients that have 12, 15 stop loss reimbursements in a given year. I have clients that have none because they had a good year. But there's almost always 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. And by the way, there are actuarial tables that tell us that predict how many you may have in a given year. Aggregate is very uncommon to hit that because, again, we're talking about a culmination of a lot of little claims. Those big claims that are already protected under individual stop loss, you don't get to count those twice. So you only count the amount up to the deductible. Any dollar amount above the deductible doesn't go towards aggregate because you've already been reimbursed for them. You're not liable for them. Therefore, they don't count towards an overall risk corridor because you don't pay those claims. Think of it like this. Individual stop loss, one giant, scary claim coming at you. Aggregate, a bunch of little claims coming at you that total, an aggregate reimbursement. Again, 30 years in the business, about 60 to 70% of my clients are in a risk-sharing arrangement. I have a lot of experience around self-funded plans, and I would say, if you do the 30 years time, the number of clients, it's over 100 years of plans self-funded over that time frame. And I would say that I've had 3 aggregate hits in all of that time. So 2-3% of the time, maybe. I've seen an aggregate hit, and they're generally not very high. Whereas individual, I've seen claims in the millions of dollars for one single claimant. So this brings us to stop loss contracts and wording.
Hi, John.
Yes.
Sorry, John, to interrupt you. We do have a question in the chat.
Oh,
Does self-funding give you a lot of flexibility in your plan design?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. That's a great question. So again, one of the reasons why you self-fund is you get a lot of flexibility. When you're fully insured, you have to adhere to the guidelines of both the federal ERISA guidelines. So whatever the federal says is mandated and you must cover. And then in fully insured, you must also adhere to state mandates. So it's what the federal says and the state. So I'll use a local state, for example. In the state of New Jersey, a fully insured plan is required to cover bariatric bypass surgery. It's required to cover dependents to age 26 or 31, to age 31. You're required to cover ED medication. So when you go self-funding, you don't have to adhere to the state guidelines, only the federal, which are much more liberal. They're not as invasive in terms of what you have to cover. And also, you can make your plan do whatever you want. As an example, I have a client and we were looking to manage their healthcare costs. This was several years ago. And I'll tell you, the client was WebMD. And we were looking to put in a very aggressive wellness campaign and overall population health management program. One of the things we wanted to do was provide medication for the top 5 chronic conditions, generic medication, for free. So we designed the self-funded program to say, if you are being treated by a primary care doctor or a specialist for one of these top 5 chronic conditions, high blood pressure, diabetes, coronary artery disease, mental health conditions, then you would get generic medication for free. You can't necessarily do that in a fully insured plan, but in a self-funded plan, you have that level of flexibility. By the way, the reason we were giving away medication is we know there's a 3 or 5 to 1 ROI on medication to treat chronic conditions. Someone who has a chronic condition takes a medication, they're much less likely to have a much higher impact healthcare claim down the road. So yes, great question. So back on track here with the self-funded plan provisions. So what you have here is you'll see and hear terms thrown around. No one is expecting you, the employer, to be the expert here, which is why it is vitally important that the consultant, broker, advisor, again, whatever term you like to use, your version of me, knows this program inside and out. There's something called a mirror provision. Remember, we talked about stop loss. What a mirror provision says in a stop loss contract is that if the plan pays the claim, we mirror that as an acceptable claim. Believe it or not, without this provision, your plan could pay for a claim believing that it is an accurate and legitimate claim, and the stop loss carrier, without a mirror provision, could review that claim and say, we don't believe that claim should have been paid, and therefore we're not going to reimburse any stop loss. This is completely legal if you don't have a mirror provision, because you have 2 insurance entities making a determination on what was a valid claim. Under a mirror provision, they're saying up front, we trust the administrator and we will pay the claim. Rate caps. Seems simple enough to understand, but it is important to make sure you get a rate cap on your stop loss. Rate caps on fully insured plans are not common, but they are common on stop loss. They're not low, don't get me wrong, they're not 10% or 15%, they're 25% or even as high as 50%, which sounds crazy, but if you have a plan that gets a $3 million claim, the stop loss carrier could have lost $2 million that year. And they could come back and say, we want a 300% rate increase, or we're going to drop the coverage. And there may be no other carrier out there willing to take that coverage. So by putting in a rate cap, you're at least guaranteeing your maximum upside. And also remember, stop loss is a very small percent of your overall plan costs. I know we're spending a lot of time talking about it, but what we tell our clients is check off every box, take every option possible, because in the end, stop loss is 3, 5, 8% of your total plan costs. So it's well worth it to pay 8% of your costs versus 7% and not get these protections at the 7% level. Guaranteed renewable. Yep, you heard it right. Stop loss is not guaranteed renewable. Again, it's the one coverage within our industry where the stop loss carrier can get absolutely crushed with a premature baby or a hemophiliac claim. I had a plan where the premiums were $800,000 and we had a hemophiliac claim come in at $5.5 million. So think about that. The company, the stop loss carrier lost $5 million on that client that year. They had a guaranteed renewable, they had a rate cap, and they had a no new laser, so the plan renewed with them. What is a laser? A laser is when we take that individual stop loss level, not we, but the insurance carrier, takes that individual stop loss level, the ISL, and raises it when there is a known risk within your population. So let's say we have a renal dialysis patient that just emerges this year in 2023. Well, the stop loss carrier didn't know about them, so they lost money on that member. But next year, if you don't have a no new laser contract, they can say everyone in your plan has a $125,000 deductible, except it's no longer insurance when we know that there's a $400,000 ongoing claimant. That's just known claims. So we're going to increase the deductible, what's called a laser, on that one member to $400,000. So everyone else, you're responsible for the first $125,000, but this individual high claimant is now $400,000. That's called a laser, and there are plenty of contracts out there with no new lasers. So hopefully you're seeing what I'm saying here, which is check all the boxes. You might have 7% of total plan costs without these provisions and 8% or a 1% increase in your total plan costs to have every one of these provisions. So another way to kind of avoid all of these pitfalls is to consider the security and buying power of going through a bundled option. What's a bundled option? That's where you just go to Aetna or Blue Cross or Cigna or United. We call them BUCAs: Blues, United, Cigna, Aetna. You go to one of the big four carriers and you say, I want to self-fund my plan, you do it. And if you do that, their contracts are guaranteed renewable. They're mirror provision because they're the administrator and the stop loss payer. They have rate caps of some sort that you can negotiate in. They don't generally include lasers. All of that is almost always included in a bundled option. The other way to do it is there are a couple of big brokerage consulting houses out there, Corporate Synergies being one of them, along with our parent company Foundation Risk, where we have a stop loss coalition called Synergy Select. Under this program, you're underwritten to be accepted, but once in the program, you have the buying power of 1,300 clients that are in this program. And what you end up with is mirrored contract, guaranteed renewable, no new lasers, and rate caps. And also, the average rate of increase is half that of industry benchmark. Why? Because again, we're providing 1,300 clients or 250,000 lives to one stop loss carrier, which means if you have one terrible year out of 5, it's okay because the risk is being spread and shared amongst an entire population, a giant population of stop loss buyers. So even with all the proper analysis and planning, claims and costs are unpredictable. That's the risk associated with a self-funded program. So you may say, John, or whoever your advisor is, we're just not comfortable with the potential upside risk, and this seems like a lot for us to digest. Are there other options available to us? And the answer is, heck yes. There are plenty of other options. We're going to talk through a few of these. Again, to the left, less risk, less opportunity to save money. Far right, more risk, more opportunity to save money. Remember, Maverick flying into whatever he flew into. So shared returns, retrospective premiums, captive, minimum premium, and self-funded plans with stop loss. We're going to talk through these. All right. So a fully insured arrangement is where there's a reconciliation at the conclusion of the plan year. This is shared return. Sorry, I should have titled that. This is offered through multiple carriers. And the way the plan works is if the claims run under expected levels, you can receive a refund or a portion of the overpaid premiums after any applicable expenses. So in this scenario, you have $1 million premium. We're on the teal line. Your actual plan costs are $960,000. You have excess premium of $40,000. The shared return that you get is $20,000. You split the excess premium. Total client cost was $980,000. So you get back $20,000 of your $1 million. Let's say the actual plan costs were higher. 1.1 million, there's no excess premium, there's nothing returned to the client, you still only pay $1 million. It's a fully insured plan. So this is a way for you to share in a good year without having much upside risk. Retrospective premium. The way this plan works is there's a true up after the year ends. And there are multiple carriers that sell these, by the way, whether it's Cigna, the certain Blue Cross plans, Aetna, United Healthcare. And then there are other less well-known carriers that do this same type of funding. So be sure to talk to your advisor about the various options available to you. Required premium, $1,050,000. Actual plan costs, $960,000. Your excess premium was $90,000. Client received $90,000. So your costs were $960,000. Here, again, plan ran over expected. You got no money back, but you were still capped at the $1,050,000. So you say, John, why wouldn't I just take a retrospective over the shared returns you just showed me? I don't have to share anything. Well, the reason is they load this premium more. So you're going to pay more in upside cost to be in a full retrospective versus a shared return. On a shared return, they're going to lower your annual premium because they know that if the plan runs really well, they're going to get some of that money back themselves. Any questions on those? Okay. So now we're going to go to one that I think a lot of people hear about, but don't really understand well. And I would say that it is one of the most, quote, sold concepts in our industry, meaning that there are a lot of people out there selling you a captive. And sometimes captives are great. So what is a captive? Now, note I said sometimes, so we're going to get into a little bit of the pros and cons of a captive. A captive is a shared risk arrangement between a company and multiple other employer groups. The plan, the captive, pools stop-loss claims from multiple organizations into a single fund while allowing each individual employer to maintain its own self-funded benefit plan. So it sounds like this is a great option, and it is under the right scenario. Again, a group captive, think of it this way. You apply to participate in a captive. you may be participating with 11 other companies that you know nothing about. The only thing you know about these companies is that they applied and were accepted to the captive. So that gives you some level of comfort knowing that they went through a process to be approved to participate in the captive. So what happens there is you have at the bottom, starting from the bottom up, you have the employee deductible, coinsurance, and copay. You have a regular plan design. Now, what's interesting is within the captive, you may be required to use the health plan that the captive has chosen. So you may have Aetna today, and the captive may be on United Healthcare. You would have to move to the United Healthcare program within that captive. There are rare instances where a captive has multiple offerings and you can choose, but even within that, you're often restricted to whatever plan design options are available within that captive. So you have employee deductible, coinsurance, copay, just like you have today. And by the way, all the other plans I talked about, self-funded, shared return, minimum premium, they're all the same. You have the same plan designs you have today, or you have more flexibility, usually more flexibility to design the plan how you want. So in the captive, you have this employee exposure, and then you have a deductible. Remember we talked about that individual deductible, that specific deductible? You have the same thing that happens in a captive for your individual employees that you are responsible for. And that is a much lower number. It might be 15, 20, 25. I haven't seen them much higher than $25,000 or $30,000 where you're responsible for that, you the employer. So Jane Doe works for you. Jane Doe has a high medical claim, $100,000. You're responsible for that $25,000 initial deductible. Jane Doe is responsible for her copays, deductibles, and coinsurance. Then there's a captive corridor, captive retention, that light blue. The way the captive corridor works is that is where you and all the other participants in the captive fund that piece. So you may have this $25,000 deductible for Jane Doe and any other individual claimant. Then from $25,000 to $250,000 is absorbed collectively by the captive. So you may not have any claims that get into that corridor, but 3 other employers do. You're helping to fund their claims within that corridor. Okay? So you have 3 levels of deductible. You have the individual one you're responsible for, you the employer. Then you have a captive deductible, which is usually a quarter from 25 to around 250,000. That one, all the claims that fall in there are pooled and paid by all the participants within the captive. And then the captive has stop loss insurance, individual deductible that kicks in at 250,000. So any individual person that goes above that 250,000 is now covered under stop loss insurance. That's the way a captive works. So the captive works well when your plan, your claims run good, and the captive runs good. The captive runs poorly if your claims aren't good. It's really bad if the entire captive's claims aren't good. That's why the underwriting to get into a captive can often be more stringent than moving to another insurance company because they're responsible for the risk of everyone in that pool. I've heard of captives as small as 6, 7, 8 employers, and I've heard them as big as dozens and dozens, even hundreds of employers. And they can be of varying sizes, the employees within a captive. I can tell you that the average size client in a captive is between 80 and 100 employees. Generally, once you start getting larger, it almost makes sense to be on your own in one of these other arrangements. Any questions on any of those programs? The last thing I want to leave you with a captive, we talked about kind of the tough underwriting to get into the captive. I also want to alert you that depending on the captive, some of them have minimum year requirements, 3 or 5 years, where once you're in, you can't leave. And if you leave, you forfeit that, remember that pool of money we put in the captive for that risk order, 25,000 to 250, that might be $300,000. Whatever pool of money you have in there, if you leave, you can't take that money with you, because that money is in there to offset the risk and the pool within the captive. So you may forfeit that money, or there may be other penalties. These are really important before going into a captive. Make sure you work with your advisor to know what you're getting into and know what the termination or exit clause is within that captive. All right, now we're going to go to one that I like for larger employers. It's called minimum premium. I'm going to take a quick drink. So minimum premium is a fully insured plan that functions like a self-funded plan. It is a great stepping stone for that 200, 300, 400 life group that wants to go self-funding, but just has some reservation. They're not Maverick just yet. You know, they're just getting in that plane for the first time, and they're not sure they're ready to fly into a volcano. So the plan provides cash flow, unlike a regular fully insured plan. The way the minimum premium works is you pay fixed costs, which is your administration charges and stop loss. You'll have some premium taxes. You might have broker advisor fees in there and some other costs that are fixed. That's usually a per employee per month, and you pay that every month based on the enrollment in your plan. Then you set up a bank account and you fund the claims. You'll hear crazy terms like impress balance, etc. Really, all you're doing is you're putting money into a bank account that the insurance carrier says you need to fund $100,000. And anytime this account gets as low as $25,000, you have to fund it back up to $100,000. That's an example of a bank account. And what happens is you're paying fixed costs at the beginning of the month, but you pay claims weekly as they're incurred. So normally on a fully insured plan, you're funding the entire premium in advance of that month, right? February 15th, your premiums are due for March 1st and the March planned month. Here, February 15th, all that you're due is the fixed cost, which again is about 15% of the total cost. And then claims are pulled the first week of March, the second week of March, the third week of March. So you can see how you have built-in cash flow advantage. What's interesting about minimum premium and why some employers prefer this over self-funding, because you're going to say, John, this sounds a lot like self-funding. And it is, except minimum premium usually has a monthly cap and an annual cap, much, much lower than self-funding. If you go self-funding, there is rarely a monthly cap. You can negotiate with certain stop-loss carriers to have something called monthly accommodation. But generally speaking, in a self-funded plan, you can have a radically high month and a low month. And in minimum premium, you have a cap that kind of protects your monthly exposure. And then you have an annual cap. Okay, so John, what happens if my annual cap is $1 million and my claims were $1.2 million? I only paid $1 million, right? That's correct. However, the 200,000, the 0.2 of the 1.2, the 200,000 carries forward as a deficit carry forward into next year. You don't pay that the following year unless you have a lower than expected claim year. So let's say the next year, your plan is priced at $1.1 million maximum, but your plan only hits 900,000. At the end of the year, the carrier calls that 200,000 deficit that you carried forward. It's an irreconcilable deficit. What does that mean? Although you carry it forward, should you terminate with that carrier and leave, they don't collect the money. It's their loss, which is why this is still sold and labeled a fully insured plan. So you can see that there are some real advantages to this. It's a way to kind of test the waters with self-funding, right? You're going into this with fixed costs. You're paying that each month, just like you would with self-funding. You're having claims drawn from a bank account, just like you would with self-funding, only you have a monthly and an annual maximum. You would have an annual maximum on self-funding, but it would be significantly higher than expected cost, where on a minimum premium, your expected cost is pretty much your annual maximum. So this often brings a question, John, why wouldn't everyone go into a minimum premium? Why would anyone go self-funding? Well, there's a few reasons why. Number one, the fixed costs of the minimum premium are much higher than self-funding. So if your plan is running consistently good, you're going to spend more to be in a minimum premium because the fixed costs are much higher. The other reason is that you don't have quite as much flexibility as you have in a self-funded, although you do have a lot of flexibility, but not quite as much. And the last reason is you don't get rebates from your prescription utilization in a minimum premium as you do in a self-funded. This isn't the time to talk about pharmacy details and rebates, and we can do that at another time. But basically in a self-funded plan, any brand prescription, specialty or otherwise, as long as it's a brand drug, your plan is eligible for a rebate or a discount back to the plan. Depending on the size of your group, you may get some of that rebate or all of that rebate. And again, that generally happens in a self-funded environment. In fully insured plans at minimum premium, you get what's called a rebate credit towards your fixed costs. But to be frank, it's a very small percent of the actual rebate that would be eligible. And the steps to moving to self-funding or any alternative funding, remember when I'm using self-funding, it's interchangeable with any of these other programs I talked about, alternative funding, is discuss all the funding options available to you. Ask, what is available to us in our size, in our market? Know your risk tolerance. And how do you do that? You include all the interested stakeholders in your organization. This is not just an HR play. You may drive the initial inquiry. Finance may drive the initial inquiry, or a president might drive the initial inquiry. But it really should be a combination of executives, HR leadership, HR administrators as well. Benefits administrators are going to be an important voice in this decision. And finance is very important. Make sure everyone is on the same page as you move forward. Go into this knowing it's a multi-year strategy. You saw the 2-year look back. You can't hop in and out of self-funding on a good year and a bad year. It's like trying to time the stock market. Go in there knowing it's a long-term strategy and be prepared for the ups and downs. There will be ups and downs. Generally speaking, good rule of thumb is 1 bad year, 4 good years, not in that order. You could go into self-funding and year 1 could be a terrible year. But if you did all the proper analysis and risk analysis and historical lookbacks and projections forward, take solace in knowing that that's likely your bad year. You might have a second tough year and then all of a sudden 4 great years. Or you might have 4 great years and think this is the greatest thing that ever happened. And the 1 bad year you have, everyone's pointing fingers. Who told us to go in this option? So just go into it knowing there's going to be ups and downs. And with that, we're pretty close to end time, so I want to open up to any final questions.
John, there are 2 questions in the chat right now. The first one, you mentioned to determine if we were a good candidate, you would look at previous claims data. I'm just curious how old claims can predict future claim fluctuations. It seems like a big gamble and hope that your employees stay healthy.
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. Old historical claims is not an ideal predictor, but it is one of the best predictors. In the end, you're always going to have those single large claims that pop up here or there. But by looking at multiple years of data, you can see kind of utilization patterns, trends, and how your population is as a whole. Again, high turnover will change that. A single or 2 or 3 large claimants will change that. But looking at historical, by the way, is exactly how a fully insured carrier predicts your risk moving forward.
Perfect. Next question, what if self-insured doesn't work out? Can a company go back to fully insured or a shared return model?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer is you can, but it becomes much more difficult. Let's say you move to self-funding and you have 3 terrible years. Well, you're going to go back to fully insured, and the fully insured carrier now has all of your data. Once you're self-funded, they know all of your claims are available, and they're going to ask for all of it. So they will take you back, but they're probably going to load the rate some. Sometimes it's worth it to pay for the loaded rate, frankly, but sometimes it's just not worth it. It really depends on each individual scenario. Have I had clients go back to fully insured from self-funding successfully? Yes, absolutely. One example is I had a client that had 300 employees. They sold a division. They dropped all the way to 100 employees. They had one tough year, said we're too small for this fluctuation. We marketed, we explained what was happening, and we actually got some very competitive proposals to bring them back. So it is absolutely possible. Just know that it can be challenging. But honestly, if you have 3 terrible years fully insured, it's challenging to get a good proposal in year 4 anyway.
Great, thank you, John. And we have time for maybe one more question. Earlier in the presentation, it sounded like you mentioned one could stay on parents' insurance to 31 years old. Did I misunderstand?
Now, well, what I was talking about is specific state mandates. So the state of New Jersey on fully insured plans, it's dependent to age 30, but it's really at attained age. So technically they could almost be 31 on the plan. Under self-funding, it would only require age 26. But that's a state-by-state issue.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John.